You almost couldn't believe what you were seeing. It's February 28th, 2025, live television, the Oval Office, President Trump looking directly at Ukraine's President Zelenskyy and just laying it out there. Colt, you're either going to make a deal or we're out. And if we're out, you'll fight it out. I don't think it's going to be pretty. And then boom, within the hour, the entire Ukrainian delegation escorted right off the White House grounds.
Wow. Welcome to Nation Scope Podcast. I'm Jordan.
And I'm James.
And this is where we dive into the headlines, the breaking stories, the big events shaping America and the world. Politics, culture, economy, tech if it matters, we're analyzing it. Today, we're doing a deep dive into the sources you shared with us covering really a watershed year, 2025. This was the year the U.S. Ukraine relationship just completely fractured. We're going under the surface here, looking at how Kyiv had to shift gears fast from, defiance to something much more pragmatic when faced with that kind of pressure. So here's the mission for today. We want to unpack how Zelensky's statements about potentially stepping down, which looked like weakness on the surface, were actually pretty clever diplomatic plays. We'll compare the two really different offers he made, look at why Europe reacted so strongly so immediately after that Oval Office disaster, and explain why that U.S. Ukraine link is now, well, purely transactional. It's a different world.
Absolutely. And that February 28th meeting, it wasn't just some diplomatic spat, The sources really frame it as a very calculated, very public strategy, a strategy of coercion, basically, against an ally.
Yeah, coercion seems like the right word, because the goals were just fundamentally miles apart, weren't they?
Completely.
The Trump administration, according to these reports, they walked in wanting two main things. First, force Kyiv into an immediate ceasefire, like right now.
Right.
And second, and this is crucial, nail down a deal giving the U.S. major access to Ukraine's rare earth minerals.
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't shy about framing it as sort of payback for all the aid the U.S. had sent.
Exactly. Payback. Meanwhile, Kyiv's position was existential, right?
Yeah.
Zelenskyy was there for one thing above all.
Yeah.
Solid, long-term, binding security guarantees. And crucially, before any ceasefire, they saw pausing the fight without those guarantees based on, past experience with Moscow is just walking into a trap. A strategic trap.
It just sounds like a recipe for disaster from the get-go, and the atmosphere in the room apparently was toxic almost immediately.
Oh, instantly, yeah.
The reports mentioned Trump starting off with this sarcastic comment about Zelenskyy being all dressed up today, just setting the tone.
Undermining him from the start.
But the real clash came when the U.S. pushed for diplomacy, just unqualified diplomacy, and Ukraine pushed back with facts.
Precisely. Vice President J.D. Vance apparently made the case for diplomacy, and Zelensky's response wasn't just rhetoric. It was grounded in hard, cold history. He pointed out that Putin had broken his own signature on ceasefire deals, 25 times?
25 times.
25 times.
Yeah.
And he directly asked Vance, what kind of diplomacy, J.D., are you speaking about?
Yeah.
It showed Kyiv came prepared for a factual argument, not just a handshake.
But the American side didn't engage with the facts, did they? They apparently took it as disrespect.
That's how it seems to have played out.
Yeah.
The conversation just pivoted. Suddenly, it wasn't about security guarantees or minerals anymore. It became about accusations of ingratitude, culminating in Vance apparently asking point blank, have you said thank you once?
Wow.
It really feels like the moment they realized the direct coercion maybe wasn't landing, they switched to this sort of moral pressure.
Yeah, a kind of public shaming attempt.
Exactly. And then came the explicit threat from Trump, basically spelling out the power dynamic as he saw it.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. I mean, it's just incredibly blunt. Survival conditioned on doing exactly what we say right now.
Openly conditioning survival and compliance.
Yeah.
And then he just cuts the meeting short.
And calls it great television. Cynical doesn't even begin to cover it. So what happened immediately after? What were the tangible consequences right then and there?
Well, the fallout was immediate and seemed designed, frankly, to humiliate. The signing ceremony for that rare minerals agreement, the supposed prize for the U.S. side, canceled on the spot.
Okay.
Joint press conference. Scrapped. But maybe the most striking detail, the one that really signaled the break.
The expulsion.
Yeah. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz and Secretary of State Marco Rubio personally telling the Ukrainian delegation they had to leave the White House grounds, not just the meeting, the premises.
That's extraordinary. Not a disagreement, but a deliberate severing of ties right there.
A purposeful rupture. And the shockwaves, as you can imagine, went global pretty much instantly.
Okay, so let's widen the lens then. Beyond the Oval Office drama, what was the reaction elsewhere? Europe, particularly. You mentioned shockwaves.
Yeah, and what's fascinating, really fascinating, is how immediate and unified the European response was. This wasn't just another transatlantic disagreement. This felt different. It was like an alarm bell went off across European capitals. It created this almost unprecedented display of solidarity that maybe hadn't quite coalesced before.
So it actually pushed them together.
It seems so. The sources suggest this Oval Office spectacle was the catalyst they needed, or maybe the final push to get serious about, strategic autonomy. You had the EU High Representative, Kaja Kallas, come out almost immediately, and she didn't mince words. She basically declared the free world needs a new leader. It's up to us Europeans to take this challenge.
That's a huge statement.
It's massive. It's not just moral outrage. It's a strategic declaration, a public call to speed up building European security, independent of, unpredictable American politics.
And other leaders jumped in too, right?
Oh, absolutely. You saw French President Macron using it to draw a really clear line, saying European support wasn't transactional, like the U.S. approach seemed to be. And German Chancellor Scholz stepped up, reaffirming long-term backing for Ukraine from Germany and Europe. It felt like they were consciously trying to institutionalize their support, make it reliable, regardless of Washington.
Just Europe rallies, tries to fill the gap. What about Moscow? How did they react to this very public breakdown between Kyiv and Washington?
Well, predictably, they saw it as a massive win. Instantaneously.
Right.
Russian officials, according to the reports, immediately labeled the whole thing a complete political and diplomatic failure for Ukraine. It was exactly the narrative they wanted.
And you can bet they used it in their information war.
Immediately. They ramped up the narrative that Zelenskyy has no right to sign anything anyway because his official 5-year term was up.
Exploiting the election postponement.
Exactly. Exploiting the fact that Ukraine's constitution requires postponing elections under martial law, something widely supported within Ukraine, by the way, to paint him as illegitimate. The American pressure tactic basically gave them perfect cover to say, see? Even the Americans are realizing this guy's not legitimate.
That's a really crucial point. And it brings us right to Zelensky's strategy, because you mentioned his legitimacy being questioned. Our deep dive suggests his public statements about maybe leaving office weren't panic moves, but actually quite calculated responses to exactly this kind of pressure and propaganda.
Precisely. And it's key to look at the two different statements he made. They weren't the same offer at all. They were tailored.
Okay, let's break those down. First, there was the one in February 2025, right before the Oval Office meeting. Let's call it the February Gambit.
Right. February 23rd. This is when pressure from the new Trump administration was really intense, focused on those mineral rights and forcing a quick deal. The atmosphere was thick with coercion.
And what was the condition he put on stepping down back then?
It was highly transactional, but aimed at Ukraine's core security need. He said he would step down immediately if it guaranteed two things: a durable peace and full, binding NATO membership for Ukraine.
So not just peace, but NATO membership included.
Critically, the strategic goal here seems clear. He was trying to wrench the narrative away from Trump's focus on minerals and deals, back to Ukraine's existential bottom-line security guarantees. He was essentially putting his own political future on the table as the ultimate bargaining chip, but saying the price wasn't minerals, it was NATO. High-stakes diplomatic theater.
Okay, that makes sense as a countermove in February. But then fast forward 7 months to September 2025. After the Oval Office meltdown, after Europe rallied, he makes another statement, the September pivot.
Exactly. September 25th, in an interview with Barack Ravid after the UN General Assembly, the whole diplomatic landscape had shifted by then. Europe's position had hardened in Kyiv's favor.
And what was the condition this time?
This time, it wasn't transactional at all. It was framed entirely as a matter of principle. He said he was ready not to go for elections after the war with Russia is finished. He positioned his presidency purely as a wartime mission, something that would naturally conclude once the existential threat was over.
So February was a high-stakes bargain. September was a statement of democratic intent.
That's a good way to put it. The goal in September wasn't to bargain. It seemed aimed at reinforcing his democratic credentials, both at home and internationally. It directly countered that Russian dictator narrative and proactively committed to holding elections as soon as conditions allowed, like a sustained ceasefire. It's quite a sophisticated evolution, using his own political situation as a strategic tool.
And presumably, he could only make these kinds of strategic plays because he felt secure domestically.
Absolutely fundamental. None of this works without domestic backing. And despite everything the pressure his public support remained remarkably strong. Sources mention a Gallup poll from July 2025 putting his approval rating around 67%.
That's pretty solid, all things considered.
Very solid. That domestic mandate was likely the bedrock that allowed him to withstand that intense external pressure from the U.S. administration.
But it wasn't just passive support, right? There was a moment mentioned in the sources, July 2025, that really tested Ukraine's own democratic checks and balances, even under wartime conditions.
Yes, a really crucial test. The government signed this controversial bill. It would have essentially put the main anti-corruption bodies, NEBU and SPO, under political control, stripping their independence.
A move that often raises red flags internationally.
Huge red flags, and domestically, too. It seemed like a major miscalculation by the government.
So what happened?
Well, this is what's significant. It triggered the first major street protests since the full-scale invasion began. People came out, citizens, even soldiers in uniform, challenging their own government on this issue.
Even during the war.
Even during the war. It demonstrated pretty powerfully, I think, that Ukraine's civil society, those democratic instincts, were still very much alive and kicking, martial law or not. They acted as a potent check.
And the government backed down.
Swiftly and completely. Faced with that public pressure, Zelenskyy reversed course. The independence of the anti-corruption bodies was restored. That ability to self-correct, to respond to internal democratic pressure, is really the strongest counter-argument to those Russian narratives about him being some kind of dictator.
Right. And it reinforces the point about the election postponement being a constitutional necessity under martial law, supported by most Ukrainians who didn't want a divisive election mid-conflict.
Exactly. The legal framework and public consensus were both pretty clear on that.
Okay, so pulling all these threads together, 2025 sounds like a year that just fundamentally rewrote the rules of the game.
I think that's right. If you connect the dots, you see a clear reshaping of the whole strategic environment. The U.S. Ukraine relationship gets redefined maybe irrevocably as transactional. It's about specific deliverables now. And at the same time, paradoxically maybe, that Oval Office confrontation acted as a massive catalyst for Europe. It pushed them to genuinely accelerate their pursuit of what some are calling a post-American security architecture. They realized that they couldn't rely solely on Washington's whims.
Which leads us to the final thought we wanted to leave you, the listener, with today. Something that builds on everything we've discussed. Consider this. Despite the chaos, the public humiliation, the sheer unpredictability coming from Washington in 2025, that very crisis forced European powers not just to say the right things, but to actually institutionalize their support for Ukraine. They started building multi-year aid packages, trying to insulate them from political shifts, particularly in the U.S. Could it be that this support, born out of crisis, actually ended up being more reliable, more predictable in the long run than what came before? Did that Oval Office meltdown, in a strange, unintended way, actually help ensure Ukraine's long-term survival by cementing European resolve? Something to think about. You've been listening to Nation Scope Podcast, where Jordan and Jamie analyze the stories shaping America and the world. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.